Hearty welcome to the 146th meeting of Europe Calling, and you are invited by representatives of the European Parliament of a number of parties and groups, and we will be welcoming a number of very high-level guest speakers. You will see how we will go through tonight's webinar. The first part will be dedicated to Commissioner Vestager. She will be expanding on the plan. Then we will have an exchange with the members of the European Parliament and the audience, and then we'll have a technical part to this seminar with our members of Parliament and the experts. You can upload your questions via Slido, but also in the chat, and we will be voting up questions. Those will be the questions that we'll be considering in the webinar. In the first part of the meeting, I shall be speaking English. In the first part of the meeting, I'll be talking in English, and then later on, I'll be switching to German.
And I welcome very much our special guest, Commissioner Vestager.
Thank you very much.
It's a great honor to have you. And she's Executive Vice President for Europe Fit for the Digital Age and Commissioner for Competition. And it's really a great honor. And maybe you remember, and I know now you remember because I told you before, that 6 years ago, you were actually one of our first guests at Europe Calling. And it's great that now, after 146 webinars, the circle is closing and you're back. And we are very much looking forward to your keynote on the Green Deal Industrial Plan. You have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me back because it's a very important discussion. How to make sure that we get industrial scale in our fight against climate change, because this is what is happening right now. How to make sure that the acceleration that is about to happen, that it actually does happen. Because there is, I think, one thing obvious, it is that we need industrial scale. And because of that, there will be enough for everyone. There needs to be green industry in Europe, in the US, in India, in China, on the African continent, in South and Latin America. So there's enough for everyone. So what we need to manage right now is to make sure that Europe doesn't lose out. Because we have set the targets. We were the first to do so, for Europe to be a climate neutral continent by 2050 at the latest. We have, legislated for the path to get there. European Parliament is in the process of negotiating the Fit for 54 package. So we are getting there sort of with the path that we want to travel. So then we were hit with war, a terrible, terrible war that is soon going into its second year. And because of that, we were also hit by energy crisis because our energy system was weaponized and turned against us. And it made it absolutely clear that there's also, a sort of a security dividend in fighting climate change, because the more self-sufficient we become when it comes to providing energy, well, the safer we are. And this is where a lot of different interests, they actually do meet in order to accelerate what we do now to fight climate change. Because we need to accelerate the deployment of renewable energy in order to be more self-sufficient than what we are today, but also in order for energy prices to come down, to be lower, predictable, without the volatility that we see right now. Because this is also what the green industries, what they are asking for. because a lot of them, they will need a lot of energy, but they also need the predictability of low prices that can come with a system that is sufficiently sophisticated to work with the different sorts of renewable energy. And then, of course, comes the Inflation Reduction Act into the picture. We have, and that is a paradox, an excellent cooperation with the US within the framework of the Trade and Technology Council. For instance, in order for semiconductors to be produced many more in the US and in Europe, we have made agreements to prevent a subsidy race between us. And semiconductors, they are also part and parcel of fighting climate change because they make all technologies so much more efficient, and we need that for that fight. But the Inflation Reduction Act is something quite different to the agreements we have with the Americans within the Trade and Technology Council, because the effects of the Inflation Reduction Act combined with the higher prices that we have in Europe is that investment may stop. At best case, paused. At worst case, actually not happen in Europe. And we need investment now for this acceleration of the green industry. And this is why we have made this Green Deal industrial plan. And it has 4 different elements. The first one is funding. The second one is sort of the rules, the regulatory approach. The third one is open trade in order to make the supply chain work. And the fourth, and maybe one of the most important, is skills. So let me just say a few words about the different elements, because funding is, yes, state aid, but not alone. It's also EU funding. We can talk about that later. And it is private funding. There will be no fighting climate change without private funding. There doesn't exist the kind of public funding that can make it all happen. Second, the rules. We need to look at permitting, because sometimes it is as if sort of the public interest in fighting climate change is not visible. So it takes ages before we get there. And we need the open trade, because a lot of the things that we need to fight climate change, well, we buy that all over the planet. But we cannot anymore have, single supplier choke points that we to some degree had with the Russian pipeline gas. So we need the open trade to suppliers and, of course, for European businesses to be able to provide their green solutions all over the planet. And last but not least, and this will be my conclusion so far, is that we really, really need skilled people. We can have all the funding in the world. We can enable a regulatory approach. We can make sure that businesses can trade. But if we do not have the people, researchers, innovators, workers, engineers, all the people that is needed, then none of this will happen. And this is why I do hope that the provocation and the problems and the challenges created with the Inflation Reduction Act can make us do something that we speak about, but rarely really do something about, because it's difficult. It is difficult to get us to the real competitiveness, the competitiveness created by people with the right skills working together to make this happen. Because competitiveness is not built on subsidies. They can give a boost. They can make sure that we don't have this pause or this stop of investment in Europe. But the real competitiveness comes with a combination of different factors. And here, I think Europe can be so much more assertive. We can be proud of this continent that we live on. We can be proud of the research, of the innovation, of the development. We can be proud of our infrastructure. We can be proud of the fact that you have governments who are easy to work with, non-corrupt, that Europe is a safe and good place to live, and that we have efficient public sectors to provide education and health and business services. And that is the point of the Green Deal Industrial Plan. Don't shy away from all we have to offer, but make sure that we build on these strengths and correct and make sure that we do better where it's actually needed. Because there's no way that Europe should lose out when it comes to be in the leadership of fighting climate change. The industrial policy that we have in the European Union is an industrial policy where we want European industry to lead, both in the green and in the digital transition. And the Green Deal Industrial Plan holds the elements to make that happen. It is not hammered out in every detail yet, but we will be getting there. And already now, as members of parliament will know, we have asked for this year to be the year of skills, because not only should we have more skills and a peak for the year of skills, no, we should have the year of skills to make us much more efficient, much more targeted, much more out there, to make people see that it is relevant to reskill and to upskill themselves. And all of that in the middle of war in Europe. All of that when inflation is haunting many, many households. Because the thing is that the planet has not stopped. Climate change is a real thing. And if we do not accelerate our fight against it, well, next generation, they will say, what were you thinking? Because you were the last generation who would be really capable of doing something about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think just to give the listeners a bit and the viewers a bit of an idea about the timeline, I think mid-March, we are expecting legislative texts, and then this goes into the European Council, and then probably before the summer, the plan will be ready. Is that roughly correct?
That is roughly correct. There are 3 legislative proposals coming. One which is called the Net Zero Act, which has to do primarily with permitting for these kind of businesses. We have the Raw Materials Act, has the purpose of the raw materials needed for wind turbines and solar panels actually to be available. And then we have the redesign of the energy market in order to make sure that it's not gas or fossil fuels that sets the price, but actually sort of our investment in renewables. And then we have the important discussion about European funding, because right now we are changing the state aid rules to enable more state funding for investment to happen in Europe. But in order to have real pan-European effects, of course, we also need European funding, also to crowd in more private funding. And that is due for early summer, the proposal to do that.
Wonderful, very good. And we are now opening the discussion a bit and pulling in some questions from MEPs, from experts that are working on this. And I'm really excited to see how that goes. So let me first welcome Anna Cavazzini. She's the chair of the Internal Markets Committee, which, is in the European Parliament responsible for everything that has to do with the internal market. So very important. Anna, welcome. And please shoot your question to Commissioner Vestager.
Yeah, thank you very much, Max, and thanks, Commissioner, for being here with us, and of course also welcome to all the more than 1,000 people listening. We are very happy about such a great interest. Coming from the German perspective, of course, I have to ask you this question. You know that there had been a lot of debate in Germany and about Germany, because here the current government is trying to support the transition of companies in order to support the Green Deal, in order to support the climate goals with money. And so it was a strong push from the German side to go in the direction of state aid relaxations. And on the other hand, there is the internal market. I'm the chair of the Internal Market Committee. Of course, I have a lot of other member states and MEPs from other member states asking me, what about the internal market? Are we not sacrificing the internal market if we put so much state aid, for example, from the German government into, let's say, German companies? So I would be interested in knowing your opinion on this. Is the single market in danger? How can we prevent a subsidy race? But then also, how can we really support our European companies in the transition?
Commissioner.
Well, these are exactly the questions that I have, of course, asked myself, and trying to work with my team, with member states, to find answers over the last weeks, because this is the core. we have this challenge that some of the subsidies that will be given because of the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, they are money in your hand. They are easy to understand, they're easy to get, they're predictable. So I think that there is a need to act. There is a need to make sure that member states can do something to say, listen, we know that you have an offer, but why not make the investment here? But of course, it's a balance because not every member state have, you know, all the money that they would wish for. And European industry is indeed European. It's not just German or French or Italian or Spanish. It is pan-European. So there is a lot of worry that the richer member state, as an example, Germany, can make sure that all the investment will then happen in Germany. And this is why we are suggesting, for instance, that you get sort of an investment premium if you invest in the poorer regions of Europe. So that if you make a new investment, well, why go to the US when you can go to a poorer region in Europe, where they do need that investment? They need the industrial rebuild, so to speak. So to encourage that this is actually being done. And this is also because we really need the single market. Probably the effects of a well-functioning single market, they are as good as state aid. So it's really, really short-sighted to see, well, let's just, you know, put taxpayers' money in here, shift from taxpayers to shareholders. Because if we don't get the balance right, we actually do sacrifice the single market that will help everyone to do better. And this is why we have been consulting really intensively with member states. And what we get back is actually quite a lot of caution. And of course, also a number of member states saying, listen, yes, we see that there is a need here and now, but also short to midterm, there is a need for Europe to invest more in this green transition. And I think it's important to recognize that double push, that we should do more now, but don't go crazy. And we should make sure that we also enable investments from a pan-European perspective. Thank you.
Still muted. Thank you very much for the question and the answer. And I maybe just add that Anna Cavazzini told me that she just came out of the discussion and the negotiations about the resolution on the Green Deal that is in the European Parliament. So for all the people here that maybe are not that familiar, normally the Parliament then has a resolution making an opinion on what the Commission is proposing, and this is ongoing. So while we are speaking here, there are negotiations going on, and also on the national government side, of course, they are talking with each other. So there's a big push in the European legislation now going on in that direction, and the politics is turning. And I see Heiko Willems from the business representation nodding as well. So I know that, of course, business is also talking. So just to give some transparency, that those discussions we are having now, they are also going on in the Parliament and in the Council. So, and then as our next questionnaire, I want to welcome Rasmus Andresen. Rasmus is the spokesperson of the German Greens in the European Parliament and fifth budgetary spokesperson for the group, I think. So Rasmus is the finance expert, and we are very much looking forward to your question, I guess, about money.
Yeah, a bit. Thanks so much also to you, Vice President Vestager, for attending the webinar here. And as you know, and I think many are aware of, as Greens in the Parliament, we are quite much supporting also an active industry policy, because we need to mobilize our industry for the green transition, and we really need to do more to ensure that this is happening. But on the other side, we are also quite engaged in having a targeted approach for the green transition, and this is what I would like to ask you about. I would like to get a better understanding of how you are actually planning to target that this will only happen for green subsidies, so that the subsidies the member states can give to the industry will be targeted for the green transition and will not be used for, I don't know, fossil fuel investments or other investments, maybe not linked to the green transition or even hurting the green transition. And on the other side, also, what are you actually planning also to ensure that if you are seeing that some member states are misusing the new set of rules to ensure that this is not happening, and how will you ensure that, yeah, the Commission is still playing an active role when it comes to avoid fraud when it comes to the state aid rules?
Thank you so much, Rasmus. Before you answer, I will just add or connect it to an audience question we have, because the audience is thinking very much in the same direction. One of the highest voted is from Harald Thielen-Redlich, and he is asking, and I'm paraphrasing into English, so how do you prevent investments going into fusion, which was a big debate at some point, nuclear fusion in Germany, and e-fuels, and how do you prevent that from happening, that this money is going into, well, moon projects that are really not helping us at the moment?
Well, there are some, principles that are important for us. First, that support should be temporary, because it's support to boost something is not a permanent transfer from taxpayers to shareholders. Second, that it must be targeted. And here we have made an analysis of the effects of the Inflation Reduction Act. So we know what sectors are those who are the biggest at risk for investments to stop in Europe. And that is windmills, solar panels, battery for e-vehicles, the raw materials that goes into this, and carbon capture. And the third is that it should be transparent. It's important that citizens know how is the state using taxpayers' money, and it's also important for other member states to be able to follow what is actually going on here. And last but not least, it's important that there are sort of anti-relocalization rules, that you cannot sort of say, well, come to me, move your jobs to my member states, and I will give you so and so. Because then it would be a subsidy race to try to attract jobs from one member state to another. So this is about new investment. It's about establishment of new facilities, of new jobs. And we still sort of put a cap to it in order to make sure that, yes, you can get a subsidy to do this, but there is, it's not like the sky is the limit. If things go very, very, very well, then taxpayers should get a bit of their money back, actually. So we try to be really targeted. And then we have also rules for decarbonization projects for all kinds of industry. So specifically, if, for instance, a steel mill want to decarbonize, well, then you can give specific aid to that. So we are very targeted, because this is about the green transition. It's not about everything. It's about where we want to accelerate in order for Europe actually to have much more homegrown energy. And because of that, also to attract the investment that will then use it and enable the green transition.
Thank you very much. We'll have later, I think, time also to come back to some things, but I want to first collect a few questions as well. And the next one is from René Repasi. He's a member of the Social Democrats, or Socialist and Democrats group in the European Parliament, quite a new MEP, used to be, or still is, law professor in Rotterdam, and also known to Europe Calling viewers as the law professor to ask for Brexit and other constitutional debates. So René, very happy happy to have you here tonight and looking forward to your surely legal question. Oh, and you're of course a member of the Internal Markets Committee, I should say, and substitute in the Economic Affairs Committee.
Well, I'm afraid I would fail my job if I would now start a law debate with our Executive Vice President of the Commission. Thanks a lot to be with us here and to have face our questions outside of the plenary room, so that our citizens can follow the debate very well. I would like to connect a bit to the question that was asked by my dear chair, Anna Cavazzini, on the internal market dimension, of course, in a sense that if I look at the pillars of the plans of the European Commission, there is indeed there is the Net Zero Act, which is somewhat copy-paste of the CHIPS Act. And then we have the state aid dimension, and then we have the skills and also the regulatory part of it. On the state aid dimension, I'm not entirely sure how much there is still missing in the current flexibility that we already have. It's very flexible what we already have. The Germans and French are using a lot of it, which gives me a bit the idea that a lot of it is on the tax benefits. And you made your own experiences on state aid and tax benefits. Unfortunately, in a sense, once tax benefits are given, it is very difficult to turn back the time. So how do you want to prevent that we come into a harmful tax competition via tax state aid under this particular framework, with the price of indeed unleveling the single market? And in addition to this, I very much appreciated your introductory words by making sure we actually have quite a beautiful bride in Europe. It's not that we have to hide behind the Americans and their Inflation Reduction Act. So what can we make it to make it even more beautiful? And I believe that there is also internal market regulation, something to be done, in particular public procurement, and making so these elements of internal market regulation more efficient, which is not yet part of the program. But I'm wondering to which extent there are plans to indeed invest even more in the strengths of a leveled single market. Thank you.
Thank you, René. Commissioner Vestager.
To the long list of amazing things about René's work, you should also mention being responsible for the Parliament's competition report this year, which is absolutely, one of my key interests, because we also need competition in order to make this work, because we need the innovation that comes from a good, fair, competitive market. As known, state aid can also come in form of tax benefits, and some of them are illegal. That is what we have seen in our work, but they can also be legal. So if it's legal to give someone 100 million euros, well, you can give them as a grant, but you can also give them as a tax credit, as long as you know what you're doing, so that it's not for eternity. That you have this benefit going for you. And also, which I think was a very good thing before Christmas, we managed to agree in Europe on this OECD idea of a minimum of 15% effective taxation. And I think it's really important to maintain that. That is a given. And I do take your point about the single markets, that we can do more. And first and foremost, we can make sure that we enforce that the single market is there. That what is produced in one end of Europe can be actually sold in another end of Europe, and that we do this sort of daily policing to make sure that the single market works. And now we're in the year of the 30th anniversary of the single markets, and maybe that's a good occasion exactly to give that push for better, stronger enforcement, and to see if we have something lacking in order for things to work well. The first thing that comes to mind is obviously the energy market, because of lack of interconnectors, we do not really have a single energy market. It is at best regional. And here I think it's really important to keep pushing, so that member states don't think about just themselves, because if they start doing that, well, it becomes increasingly difficult to balance the energy market. And as you know, it needs to be balanced all the time with the many different sorts of electricity and energy that will be produced. So I do take that. I think it's a good inspiration for the work on the single market. And that is an enormous benefit. I think to some degree it's better than matching the state aid that can be given.
Thank you very much. And I will get just the next one in. So I think I like that very much. So I don't have to ask the question myself. I can just give to people that really know much more about this, including Michael Ploss, who's a climate spokesperson and environment and industry committee member for the German Greens. And as also can be seen by the flag in the background, is all very much about climate. So Michael, good to have you, and please shoot.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I would actually ask my question in German, if the translation is working. Okay. Also herzlichen Dank, dass Sie da sind.
Thank you very much for having come. 23 years ago, I was a little boy. I still went to school, and we put a solar panel on our roof, and we went to a solar panel manufacturing company in Freiburg. But this factory is not there any longer. It doesn't exist any longer. It would be my dream to go back to producing solar panels and wind power equipment and hydrogen plants and so on and so forth. And I think it's very important to concentrate on just that. We should not be dispersing funds broadly, I don't think. However, my question is a different one. You can give a lot of subsidies to industry, but you can also work with regulation. You can say, we will change procurement for public entities, for example. They will have to regulate that certain conditions be met, that their produce must be green, that they must practice social working conditions, that we want a green quota in steel production, for example. So we would be actually supporting green steel, and we wouldn't be spending as much as we now do of taxpayers' money on the wrong products, if you like. Do you think we could work with regulations?
I will. Thank you very much, Micha. I will just also tell you that one of the most voted questions in our Q&A is from Alexander Rockel, who's exactly asking this question: what is the plan to rebuild the solar industry in Europe? And we have many more questions about concrete. We see solar factories, especially in Germany, or all other places, have been shut down over the last 10 years. So there are a lot of questions also from citizens on this. So I'm really excited to hear what you can say about that.
Well, first on the solar panels, I think that's a really sort of sore point. Because we sort of, without really looking, all of that production disappeared to China. And the trade defense measures that were put in place, they never really worked, because then the solar panels, they just came in from other parts of the world. I think it's really important also that we get more efficient solar panels, so that we combine research, innovation, getting to market, getting the production up and running again, so that we make sure that it is the solar panels of the future and not just sort of taking back what we lost ages ago. And as far as I know, there are businesses on the very brink of investing again in producing solar panels in Europe, because we need to get back to that. Of course, we also need solar panels that are well suited for rooftops, so we don't have to use a lot of, in particular, arable land for solar panels, that we are, really smart in where we deploy these different ways of using renewable energy or renewable production. I also take the second point. I think it's absolutely essential that we use sort of all these sort of market tools to make what we get as green as possible. And I think one can, if member states are not started already, well, they can get started as we speak, because the procurement rules, they are quite flexible, so that you can make green procurement to say, well, listen, this is taxpayers' money. We have a democratically decided legislation for the reduction of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. So this, of course, should be reflected in what we are asking for when we procure different things, because I completely take this point that this is needed. I may be a bit doubtful as whether or not we should do more, because we are already in Europe have a lot of regulation to say, well, how things should work. We have regulation on how to enable the circular economy, how to make sure that products are as they should be, energy efficient. Parliament just made, I think, amazing work on energy efficiency in buildings, so that we're pushing all the time. Now we also need to make sure that we get it to work. That member states use it, that construction industry is being changed, that we get the deployment of this energy, because this is the really hard thing to do. It's difficult to pass legislation, don't get me wrong, but it's even more difficult actually to use it. And we're in a hurry. You know that even better than I do. Last year, I think, was the highest carbon dioxide emissions on this planet ever. There's really, really, really no time to waste.
Thank you very much. And we will conclude this little round of MEPs asking questions in the open. I mean, I have to say all the plenary questions, so committees, of course, are completely transparent, and you can watch every committee meeting and plenary meeting in the European Parliament. So it's not like, you know, this is a background discussion otherwise. But of course, like in this direct interaction, it's quite rare to have this. So this is kind of the special thing is about you only have to watch one thing, not 10 committee meetings. So with a further explanation, I welcome Martin Heuschig. Hope I pronounced that right. Did I? Not?
Yes.
Oh, yes, I did.
Thank you.
Excellent. Wonderful. Great to have you. Martin is from Renew Europe, so the liberal group in the European Parliament. He's a member of the Environment Committee and alternate substitute member in the Budget Committee, and also co-organizing this with the other MEPs tonight. And really great to have you, and looking forward to your question.
Thank you, and sorry for being late. Great to see you, Margrethe. And I'm wondering today, maybe some of the participants saw the announcement of the kind of unicorn investment fund that the EIB did with a group of member states. And I'm wondering, there is this really important element in the whole transition of the European economy, and that's how to bring the innovation potential that we have, the results of the funding from Horizon, the amazing minds that we have in Europe creating clean technologies, into companies that grow in size and stay in Europe. We've seen, and that we lost lots of the solar and wind manufacturing, but we also lost lots of the other manufacturing as well as digital to US, where the venture capital, whether we like it or not, is way more present. And I'm wondering where you see the potential, rather than kind of throwing subsidies around, to invest as a Europe, to invest into equity in these companies, because hopefully if they stay, it's not only bring more results in terms of revenue from investments, but also tax residency, jobs, and so on. So do you think we can expect something from the Commission on this? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. Martin is from, for everyone who wondered, he's from Slovakia, because we have such a German around here. So Slovakian presence, great to have you. I think it's our first Slovakian guest, which is excellent. We should have more. Commissioner Vestager.
Well, we have not concluded our discussions yet, so I can tell you what I think. I think indeed that we as European, as sort of with European funding, we should do much more equity. I see the same thing as you do. The US capital market is still more attractive than the European capital market, because you can get people to invest in you. when people invest in you with equity, well, you get capital, but you also very often get competence on board. People say, I want you to succeed. When you go to the bank, you create debts, and with those debts very often comes worry. So even though the European capital market is improving, we have more venture capital now than we had 5 years ago, I think we should do more. And instead of talking about a fund which is a giant pile of money, when we then hand out grants, I think we should think much more in equity. And we have an example, and we've had a lot of trouble in getting that organized. So we know now how to solve the difficulties, and that is the European Innovation Fund, which is allowed also to lose money. It's allowed to take risks. It's allowed to be out there to take a chance on those who have potential, but need that kind of capital to scale. And we could do that even bigger because now we have the experience. Of course, there should be a fund manager, but then you could invest much more all over Europe. And once things have scaled, then you could pull out, let others come in, and you could reinvest in someone who would then need it. And maybe we should think a bit more about this kind of investment instead of always thinking about either grants, loans, or guarantees, because then there could be an obvious upside to the European taxpayer. But of course, then one must be willing to take that risk and sometimes, of course, also lose money.
Thank you very much. And we will have 3 more minutes with the commissioner, and we will have 2 more short, all questions are rather long, but one of the most voted ones is from Waltraud Bergmann, and reminds me very much of what Vice Chancellor Robert Habeck, who was in Washington, D.C., together with a French counterpart, was also talking about in the press conference, topic of agriculture. Because when we look at industry, obviously, in Europe, agriculture, as well as in the US, is a super big industry. But so far, we haven't heard much about whether industry would play a role, agriculture would play a role here in the industry plan, and what the future there is, because obviously there's a lot of room there to save carbon emissions. It's one of the biggest sectors that has so far been, well, not really helping in reducing carbon emissions. So this is the one question. And then since we have a lot of Germans in here, I have to ask that question. I mean, a lot of the German discussion, especially in the conservative bubble, has been about new money and old money. So whether we, as a European Union, after the COVID crisis, are now going into more shared money using, so raising more EU funds for this program, or are we going to use money that is maybe coming from programs that have not been used completely? So where's the money coming from? A lot of Germans do ask that, but I know that there are from the Netherlands and other frugal countries, as they call it as a term in the European bubble, that are really interested also about this question, because this is something also important to some citizens. So I have to ask that.
But that's a very welcome question, and it's a difficult one. I think that sort of first things first, we need to know what is it that we want to do. And if that is sufficiently attractive, then probably we can also find the funding to do it. And as said, we have a lot of experience with Cohesion Fund, with Just Transition Fund, with the Recovery and Resilience Fund. And all of that has its own logic. And maybe we should not just do more of the same. Maybe we should do something new. And this is why I advocate for this more direct equity investment, because that will also be attractive for private financing, because then everyone, us taxpayers, we could take sort of the high risk and then have private capital come in. And then we don't need as big a pile of money, so to speak, as we would if it would only be grants that we were handing out. And I think one should be, very, very pragmatic when it comes to this question of where to find the funding. Because as it is right now, money is not for free anymore. 2-3 years ago, interest rates were so low that it was a really good thing to go to the market. Now, some member states have easy access to the market, then the European Union, and then some member states have very difficult access to the market. So I think one should just, be more imaginative in saying, of course, we should use the funding we have already in the best possible way, and then see if we need new funding. And if we do, then of course, as little as possible, since we should use it in the most efficient manner. And I think it's really important not to end up in the same discussion as we've had before as to whether we should have common debts or not, because we're in a hurry. So this is why better find new ways of enabling businesses to grow and innovation to take place, because capital can be present, rather than to have the old debate all over again. And for me, this is really important. And just one word on agriculture, because as you say, we haven't spoken a lot of this. In Europe, we have been supporting agriculture ever since the first days, and we still do massively. It's a big chunk of the European budget that goes to support agriculture. There's a lot of things that need to be done, because even if all energy produced was carbon neutral, it would not be enough. We need to get agriculture on board, and to do that, more important steps are taken. But of course, that is a very important big discussion that is not concluded yet.
Thank you very much. I think what has concluded now is your time and your contribution to this evening. Thank you very much. It was a great honor. Maybe you were happy to say a few, final words if you want before you need to rush. But I don't want to keep you any longer than your calendar permits.
Well, I'm sorry that I have to go. I have enjoyed this a lot, and I think it shows that this is a debate that takes nuance and facts and a pan-European perspective in order for this to work. But of course, it's difficult when we have such a thing as the Inflation Reduction Act. But the good thing about it is that we focus in getting the scale we need in order to fight climate change, and at the same time to get sort of the security bonuses that we are not dependent on some single supplier for the energy that's absolutely essential for Europe to work. So it's been a pleasure. I look forward to continue cooperating with everyone that has been present here today. And I will not conclude anything, because you have very interesting speakers ahead of you, and that will be a great discussion. So thank you very much from my side.
Thank you very much. Have a very nice evening.
Thank you.
And I will then now, as promised,
German. And some of you may depend on interpretation from now on. The last 45 minutes of this webinar will be dedicated to an expert talk. We will be hearing two perspectives from Professor Achim Truger. He's a member of the economic expert team in Germany. And I am very, very happy and pleased, Professor Truger, that you're with us, and Dr. Heiko Willems. He's the executive manager or director of the German industry in Brussels, and he will be presenting the view of industry to us. We will, of course, also have time to enter into a debate. And perhaps I should pass on the question on equity, risk capital, and investment to Professor Truger. This is certainly very interesting from a German perspective too. And of course, I'll blow you up before you speak to us.
Ganz herzlichen Dank für die Einladung. Tolle Veranstaltung. Ich bin froh, dass ich es endlich mal geschafft habe.
Thank you very much for this invitation. That's a great webinar. I'm happy that I can be here. Very often I wasn't able because we weren't supposed to speak on things. Well, the Council of Economic Experts hasn't taken a common position on this yet. We just haven't found it. But we have some positions on financial politics at the European level. So at least that is that. I'd like to start with what I think has been proven wrong now, so what doesn't work, hasn't worked, where the German and partially also European debate isn't going in the right direction. And we have to start the age of realism and pragmatism, and the EU Commission is doing that. So this slightly, the slightly weird view that we have in Germany, that as long as we have legality and regularity, we are fine even if we're drowning. So in terms of relevant questions being asked, the answer would be no, no subsidies. That's very difficult because you'd have to be very, very careful. And as for public financing, the answer would be no, it's not really necessary. There are enough funds. We don't need more, and we need strict austerity rules, and there shouldn't be any changes. So that's a very strict view, and I think in the past it has become clear that this doesn't work. And since COVID, the entire EU is going about things a little bit more pragmatic. And I think that's the backdrop against which we have to see the Commission's reaction now. And I believe that is a very sensible reaction. And I think I've also already hinted at the things, the fact that the industrial policy measures that they're thinking about should be accompanied by an EU fund that ideally can fund things in all member states. And we need fiscal rules, financial rules at EU level to prevent that such member states that have a very restricted room of maneuver can't take certain measures. So they should also be able to take certain measures. Their room for maneuver shouldn't be as restricted. So that by way of introduction. And of course, it's not really useful to be beautiful and pure, but let European industry drown and die. Of course, something has to be done, something needs to be done. But on the other hand, there is a danger that old industrial sectors or old factories are being financed without any conditions. So it has to be made sure that the direction is the right one, also in terms of climate policy and the environment. So there are a few things that have been mentioned, so it's important that they are being taken into account. And an older position of our council, I would be interested to hear something about the flanking climate policy measures and the market policy measures. And I think that it should be made much clearer how these different measures will go together. And one thing that I wasn't really, that I didn't really agree with was this idea that this isn't the time to talk about EU financing, yes or no, joint bonds, EU bonds, yes or no. Well, maybe such debates in principles aren't the first thing to start, because first you have to find out what works. And in Germany, very often you just from the very beginning start thinking about the fact that you do not want EU bonds in the end. So you start out by saying there's no need for finance, because you want to prevent that very result of EU bonds. So I really hope that people are now pragmatic enough to let go of that particular blockage. And it should be possible within the fiscal rules to create a little bit of breathing room. And the proposal by the Commission, I think, is really quite good, a little bit technocratic, but it is quite good. And I think they create some room for maneuver. So if you take these things together, I think there's a real chance that the result would be very positive for the EU overall and also for climate policy and industry. Thank you. Thank you. So a question back to you that we've heard a lot about inflation last year, especially. And we were looking at inflation rates in the euro area compared to the US. They said, well, their inflation, because of their investment program, is driven by their investment. And for us, for Europeans, it's the high energy prices and the secondary effect on food and other goods. So do you see that risk that because of that Green Deal investment plan, inflation will be driven up? Is that something we should talk about? Because I'm sure that it will come up, this question, in Germany in particular, but also in other countries. I'm talking about investment. Well, it depends on how you build it. If you understand it purely as a subsidy program and fiscal expansion, yes, then there is that risk. But many of the measures that have already been taken are more about limiting price increases and very targeted help and support and subsidies. And if that leads to cheaper energy, especially cheaper green energy, then that's not going to actually drive prices up, I think. So if you really proceed in a very targeted way, I don't think that there's that risk. And in terms of fiscal impulses, it's clear that fiscal impulses have to be phased out or down after the crisis, and then it will go in the right direction. I think that inflation is already on the right track. Of course, things can also go wrong with energy prices, can always go wrong, but I don't think that that's going to be a major topic in 2 years or so. Thank you. Well, that was an important point. Well, now I would like to ask for our second input for this round. That's Heiko Willems from the Federation of German Industry. Dr. Willems, welcome, and we're looking forward to your point of view. We had politics, we had the science, the academic community, and now industry. Thank you. Yes, it's really good that you're also talking to industry about the Green Deal Industrial Plan. That's very important. And it's something that we appreciate, that we now have a plan at the European level, that we can talk about a specific plan on how to make sure the Green Deal and decarbonization will work. We have a lot of regulation in Fit for 55, etc., but not a lot of incentives. And the Americans are doing it differently. They're spending a lot of money and working with incentives mostly, whereas we have really started with rules and regulations. And the industry has always said, yeah, Fit for 55, we support it, we support the goals anyways, with the objectives, but the measures have to be designed in such a way that it's doable for industry, because it can be nobody's interest that decarbonization equals deindustrialization. I think that's been made clear. It's in our interest that industry will be successful and also a pioneer for other regions of the world. Of course, we can just switch factories off, but that's not going to help climate and nor Europeans. So the Green Deal Industrial Plan, what does it contain? Lots of announcements. It is a plan, and concrete legislative proposals are to follow. And then, honestly, the Commissioner has left us. There's also a lot of old things made up to be new things. Lots of things that had already been part of the work program, and now they get this new label, part of the Green Deal Industrial Plan. But I don't really see how they are going to carry that plan. I mean, skills and trade, of course, they're important, but I don't see how these elements will be as essential. I doubt it. Also, projects like the Raw Materials Act or the energy market redesign, those are projects that the Commission had been planning anyway, so that's nothing new for me. What's new? Well, the money and the type of distribution of the money, the funding. So rather than sticking with the temporary prices framework that was sort of mitigating the energy price crisis after the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. And now we have the prices and transition framework. So it's expanded and extended in criteria and time. So we welcome that, because industry needs funds in order to master decarbonization. The BGI, our federation, had published a study on climate a few years ago, and we updated it after the climate goals had been increased. And our experts calculated that in order to decarbonize German industry to reach the climate goals, we'd need 860 billion euros by 2030. 860 billion euros, that is not something that industry can come up with by themselves. We do need public funds, and national subsidies are easier to come by than European funds. So we do need help. Ms. Cavazzini has said that we also have to take other member states seriously. Of course, it can't be that just German and French industry will receive subsidies. As a federation, we're not really that in favor of subsidies, because we're really also looking at the interest of entire sectors and not just individual companies. And when you're picking out individual sectors in a narrow way, then there's always a little bit of a risk, but we cannot do completely without public funds. And then also the method in the plan, the amortization options, we really like, because that's exactly what's happening in the States with the IRA. And that's a major incentive. I think that was an alarm call for our politicians here to take this step as well. So will we need additional European money? Yes, probably. We're not really very strict in our views on that, not as German as the discussion sometimes sounds, to put it that way. Of course, it's always good to look at where we already have money rather than using new money. But it's not that simple to just tap funds from Next Generation EU or Repower EU, because it's already been allocated per member state. So you'd have to reallocate these funds, which isn't that easy. So maybe you'd need a type of sovereignty fund parallel to that. As I said, we don't have very strict views on these financial support ways. And there's another second element that's new in the industry plan, a Green Deal industry plan, that we find very interesting, namely simplifying procedures. So there's mention of one-stop shops and time limits. And especially because of the time horizon, I mean, 2030, that's basically the day after tomorrow. So if I have to decarbonize industry, facilities, etc., factories, then I have to build things, get building permits. It will take too long. Just to explain that for our audience, one-stop shop means you just file one application with one authority, and if they say yes, then you're done. You don't have to apply to 5 different authorities in order to build your building. Yes, that's it, and that would really speed things up and make things easier, simplify them. So we're very hopeful for that, and we're very much looking forward to the concrete content of the Net Zero Industry Act that we'll see in March, because that could be a good way to speed things up and help industry through this transformation. And now my last point, maybe a little bit it's difficult for some of the audience, and then difficult to hear, and then also difficult for me to answer questions. So we have some conflicts between the raw materials that we're working with, and we can see that now with renewable energies. And against the backdrop that of the war between Russia and the Ukraine, and that we had to leave gas quickly and expand renewables, then we had to speed things up, maybe leave some of the nature protection rules aside, etc., in order to build a new grid or build a new windmill, etc. So we have to be a bit more honest and find the right balance, let's say. The Industrial Emissions Directive, for instance, it's been proposed for a year now by the Commission, and from our point of view, this revision wasn't really necessary. Procedures will just become more complicated, and criteria are being made stricter in lots of different areas, and then getting things cleaner is going to be more difficult than before this review. So we would have wished for a different balance there. And I think that's another discussion that's starting now. So what else can we do? Speeding up procedures is one thing, but we also have to find this right balance between what you're trying to protect and how are you going to bring that together, because we have very high protection standards, but if we want to be fast in our decarbonization, we have to see how can we do it. And then mottos like a non-toxic environment is difficult, because some substances are toxic and they are dangerous, but if you ban them completely, then you'll lose parts of your industry completely as well. And then we can forget about digitalization and green industry in Europe. So that's my slightly provocative statement, but then maybe there'll be some discussion after that. Yes, provocative is always good. Just before we open,
Das Thema Arbeitskräfte, Skills, ein bisschen beiseite geschoben, hatte ich das Gefühl.
You talked about workforce and skills, but only ever so briefly, and then you moved on. I think that perhaps it would be interesting to hear something on competent labor from you. Well, I do represent the BDI and not the BDA, so it's not such a pressing topic for us, but of course it is an important topic in general terms. We do have a lack of a workforce in certain areas of the industry and the economy, but that is a general problem, and I don't think it's a newly targeted topic within the context of the Green Deal industry plan. I don't think that that is the most important part of the plan. The question has been raised several times. A number of people said, I'm 54 years old, but they tell me that I can't find another job. So perhaps we could look at Pillar 4 at the qualified workforce. I think that the expert group did have a position on that. What is your idea? What would we need at the European level to be able to get this problem of lacking qualified workforce under control? Unfortunately, I have to admit that I can say very little only about the European level. We said a lot about requalification, further training, and so on and so forth, and also on migration of workforce, because we felt that a lot is lacking, but it's mostly being dealt with at the national level, to be honest. So I can't say too much about it. it. But I share Mr. Willems' view on it. I think that if we talk about industrial policy, then that is not really the novelty in the plan, and it's not perhaps the most important topic. At the same time, of course, the framework conditions need to be looked at, and it'll come more and more to the fore because of the demographic development. But I don't think that it is the most important perspective of the industrial policy. Well, then let's open it up for a general debate. A number of members of the European Parliament who've been sitting by and listening very patiently haven't had a possibility to say anything. Anna Cavazzini is still with us, and I would like to resume the old order. And perhaps Mr. Truger has little time left before he needs to leave us. Does anyone have a pressing question to Professor Truger? No? You're all very happy. Very good. Well, then, Anna Cavazzini, you have a possibility to comment everything that you heard so far. Thank you very much. I have two short observations to make. Maximilian Fries said it at the outset. We had the debate at the European Parliament, and our reply of the European Parliament to the industry plan and to the Inflation Reduction Act. The right side of the Parliament says we don't need any new regulations. They are in our way. They are obstacles. We just need to proceed. But the liberals, like Martin Häuser, they say, well, if that's the solution, then we would have a predictability and we would have a clear framework within which the industry can move. So, Mr. Willems, what is your take on that? I would be interested in knowing that. And I also think it would be very interesting to consider the question of whether it is such a disaster that the US have adopted the IRA. Are we not actually, if you look at things very pragmatically, more or less on the same level? Is it not also offering us new dynamics, and we perhaps take up some loose ends and carry on with what we need to do anyway? So I would like to kick that ball back into the debate. Let's move to Professor Truger right away, because he'll have to leave us pretty soon. Yes, well, I don't think the world will go under because of it. For the climate, it is actually very good that the United States are finally taking it up and that they are getting active in the field of climate change. It's much more than we could have expected from them in the past. But obviously, some problems with a view to competition will and competitiveness will arise. At the same time, it's not the end of the world, because if you look at the debt brake, for example, all of those who don't want to do anything, all those who want to simply apply the pure science, they will also have to reconsider whether that's still the right option. But there is no reason to panic at this particular moment in time. And I think, quite honestly, things have not been spelled out so clearly what the way to climate neutrality really will be in Europe or in the US, but it's being accelerated. Our finding process is perhaps moving along much faster now. Some countries have already used huge funds to manage the crisis. Please allow me to withdraw now. I had a great time joining this debate. Thanks very much, and have a nice evening. I'll just simply arrange for others to come in between the different political groups, just to be fair. We just mentioned what the US are doing. René Repasi is the substitute chair of the committee for relations with China, and China has been hugely active, and particularly active on the African continent, for example. Is it not a problem that we concentrate so much on the United States? Of course, it's very good what they are doing now, finally, but shouldn't we also move China and Africa further to the top? Well, I think, to be honest, that this is a valid point, a very valid point, because we're really all excited about something that the United States are finally doing, whilst the Chinese have been doing it all along. Industrial policy has, however, been a slightly neglected topic in the European Union for quite some time. Let's not forget about the Siemens-Alstom merger, and I certainly don't want to go back there. But still, the question arises, what exactly is competitiveness? Do we have to protect it at the expense of global competitiveness? Perhaps the BDI would have a position on it. And it is correct. We would be wrong to simply concentrate on the US. We must look at everyone else in this game. And we also need to be looking at the taxation question, and tax aid is also something that is being offered in the United States. That's an ambition of their new industrial policies, and they just simply do some greenwashing with it. I think there are a lot of there's a lot of old wine and new wineskins here to be identified. Look at what foreign markets are suffering from the initiatives from China, for example. It has been said by Mr. Bloss, who said that solar panels used to be produced in Europe and they went all the way down to China and are being produced there. So I think that it would be very interesting to hear from Mr. Willems what the position is, because we hear all the time that we need to react immediately here so that industry does not leave us, that does not relocate somewhere else. What would have to change? Procedures will have to change. Let's not wait for 3 years until we get a decision on a project. We need to be able to operate and to develop. That's something that the internal market will have to ensure. But how great is the danger indeed of relocation of our industry? And do we need more regulation? Do we need better procedures? Do we need a certain political security or guarantee? Do we decide, do we opt for green hydrogen right now, and then in 2 or 5 years' time we change our minds and we opt for something else? What is your priority, Mr. Willems? Let me turn to Rasmus Andresen and give him an opportunity to enter into this debate. Perhaps you would like to raise additional points. Yes, maybe I would like to add that Mrs. Vestager presented in a way which leaves me a little worried about the concrete implementation. I'm not so sure what will be possible for the member states to finance. René Repazi just mentioned the question of the tax breaks, for example, and the OECD and others have reflected on that also. So I think it's important to discuss that too. But surely it's not good enough to be looking only at the US, although we welcome that they finally take the climate on board and develop some activity in a climate policy, probably not in the same vein as we do. So I am a little concerned about the future steps that we can take because my worry is the implementation. What we must not have is an easing of the regulations for the member states, which could lead to abuse. And the EU Commission would suddenly find itself in a situation where it cannot act any longer because the powers are not with them. The other question arising is what's the situation of other member states regarding the rules? The Vice President has said herself that some of the rules don't allow them to change much of their situation. So what is the common fiscal capacity which is so sorely missed? We think that the funds available at the European level are far from enough, and they have already been allocated. Our Minister for Finance in Germany says that we have huge funds available at the European level. That is just simply not true. And some of the member states of the European Union would not be able to take up loans in order to finance such major changes to become climate neutral. And I think that is something that needs to be discussed thoroughly in the next couple of weeks. And then the question arises, what should be our criteria? And how do we how do we understand Joe Biden's position, and how do we go about our budget? I think it's also important to have that debate at the German level because Berlin will have to agree, and we all know very well that not everybody is agreed on those budgetary questions. But I think it's interesting to see how open we have entered into this debate. Thanks very much. Mr. Willems, I would like to remind you of the question of Mr. Rapazi, the danger of relocation. Yes, perhaps I can pick out a few questions. First of all, the Chinese also offer state aid, and they have done that for decades, but we don't expect anything different from them because it is the whole economy is governed by the state, of course. That the Americans so massively enter into climate protection and say that they want it and that they will support it, that is in itself very good. And there are many German companies who profit from this move because either they have subsidiaries in the United States or they export to the United States. So it really wakes everyone up. Obviously, there is a concern about a possible relocation, but let's not think that everything will be lost just because the US offers billions of dollars to support this climate change cause. But I think things look quite different when you look at them much closer. Of course, the market in the United States is huge, but only a very small fraction of the funds will be used for state aid in this context. Of course, money is always a pulling factor, but it might be just the one step too far. For some of the sectors, it's of course of a great advantage for pharmaceuticals, biotechnology, and for others, the situation has always been very positive, and now there's added financing available. But what about the green technologies? We have heard from individual companies that they've received offers, and it's not only the examples of Norfolk. There are others too. I don't think we must generalize, and we must look at competitiveness. I'd like to get the other two on board so that we're fair in sharing the possibilities to join the debate. Martin Hojek, I'd be interested in perhaps moving away a little bit from the German perspective. What is your national debate all about on this plan?
Ja, das ist eigentlich eine sehr gute Frage. Aber ich werde es nicht versuchen, alles zu Deutsch zu sagen, weil es
It's a very good question, but I'm not going to explain all that in German.
The biggest problem is at the moment that there is simply no debate. I think, and this is I think part of the problem. The whole situation is reduced to government throwing money at everybody to somehow salvage the energy prices. But if you look at what Slovakia has been doing since the beginning of Putin's play with the energy prices, was clearly insufficient. We were sadly celebrating when our government negotiated in summer last year, Minister of that time Minister of Economy on the council, that we actually don't have to save. We can increase our gas consumption by 5%. So I think this is something which at the moment is very, very sad. And actually my hope goes a bit towards also the German industry to kind of because it's quite represented and heavily invested in Slovakia, to be louder about it, to be vocal in also the political discussion, saying, look, if you guys want to keep competitiveness, we need to change. And I think this is going across the entire union. And for me, the biggest question in here is how we can, as Europe, jointly, without going apart on our national turfs and essentially really trying to outbid each other, because that's my concern now with the German situation, create a situation that we not only safely navigate the disruption we have ahead of us, because this change is going to be profound disruption, like when the smartphones were introduced. Things came out that no one predicted before. But how can we come out economy-wise, working conditions-wise, and jobs-wise, as well as environmentally, on top of it? And I don't think it's only about money. It's about having a clarity on the direction. I would be less bound to different technologies, but definitely having a full commitment and accepting that this is not something that Brussels is forcing us, but it's something which is a combination of huge need from the perspective of climate disaster that we're actually facing, and acutely facing, and unique opportunity. I think this is what we look at it as a problem. We don't see the opportunity, and here I have to quote Werner Hoyer, who is the president of the European Investment Bank and fellow German, that saving the climate is the best business opportunity out there, and it should not be therefore, I think, relying on subsidies. It needs to make money, and I honestly believe it can deliver prosperity. I will not say growth, because that's kind of tricky concept discussion, but prosperity and economic stability. And I think this is where we have to get it at the end.
Vielen Dank. Auch nochmal ein sehr wichtiger Punkt.
Thank you. That was an important point. So we're going to go 5 minutes over, but it's very interesting. I hope that everyone is okay with that. So just please stay to listen to Michael Bloss. I mean, Michael, I could give you 20 questions from the Q&A. Lots and lots of people are asking, what about the taxonomy? How can we make sure that it's not going to be greenwashing? That is the main concern, the first 30 questions almost. How can you as MEPs make sure, governments make sure that the money goes to the right places and not fossil fuels, etc., fossil lock-ins? So that's what I would like to pass on to you. What can you do as democratic watchdogs? Thank you. I just wanted to say one sentence on the topic of the Mr. Willems. How much environmental protection can we afford? I mean, of course, that's a broad topic, but if you're trying to protect people and health by having higher standards for toxins from factories, that's not going to be a barrier to, for instance, a new solar panel factory. So you have to take a closer look before you just say, oh, we don't need environmental protection anymore because they're in the way, standing in the way of solar panel factories. So that actually brings me to the question that you just asked me, how can we avoid greenwashing? Well, I mean, there's something new about this, really, because it's really about industrial policy, meaning what type of industry do we want and what type of industries do we no longer want? And so the gates have been opened, let's say, and everyone wants to subsidize everything, which isn't going to work, and we don't have the money anyways. And so we're doing this now because on the one hand, we realized just how dependent we are from gas. So we want to go towards renewables. And then we understand that in terms of renewables, solar panels, we're really dependent on China. So we're just as liable to blackmail from China, because if they just stop delivering us solar panels, then we can't even reach our goals. So from those from looking at those aspects, there are certain central technologies that we have to be able to build in Europe, and that's a global challenge for everyone. And for me, that's being able to build windmills, wind power plants, solar plants, heat pumps, storage, grids, electrolyzers. These are central future-proof technologies that we want to have, and that's what we're legislating for, and that's it. And we're not trying to support all types of other things. And that's the major battle in Brussels at the moment. We are saying we really want to keep it limited to those few things, and especially the conservatives. So other people are saying that they want to support lots of different things. For instance, fossil technologies should also be supported, e-fuels, maybe even blue hydrogen, etc. And we don't need all of that, and we don't have the funds to support all of that. And I think it's an important discussion that's going on at the moment. I hope we're going to win it. And a second point I had is just all of this will cost a lot of money. And Rasmus just said it. A lot of the money that we planning to use now had originally been intended for something else. You can't spend €1 3 times over. But regulation is a fair instrument, because if you're looking at Europe, countries that have a lot of money to invest in this way are Germany and France. But if we had a green steel quota, a quota policy, that would be an option for all member states to invest in. So that type of policy and regulation is fair, because it's not just the member states with the most money that will win, but those with the best ideas. And then one last point on the lack of skilled workers. I don't have the solution here, but one aspect is important, and I just forgot about that: serial renovations. So renovating houses, that's really one of the central technologies that we need in order to reach our climate goals. And at the moment, we just don't have enough skilled workers. But part of that could be industrialized. For instance, there are technologies using drones, flying around a house to measure everything exactly, and then the insulating slabs will be assembled in the factory and just put in directly, and you don't have to cut them on the spot. So there's a lot of possibilities and options that we will need in order to get this climate turnaround going. So you have 30 seconds. Well, I also think that it's really important that we use the success with the Green Deal and climate protection to make it into a success for jobs, for employees, because there is a lot of potential for new jobs, and it would be a waste to not use that opportunity. So we want away from fossil fuels, but climate industry will offer just as many good jobs, and we have to make sure that they're going to be in Europe. Thank you. I know we could continue for a long time, and there are lots more questions, but we have answered lots of them. We have lost half of our panel and gone over time a little bit. Thank you very much to everyone, organizers, MEPs, panelists, audience. It was really interesting. And thank you also to Commissioner Vestager. It was an evening with lots of different perspectives and political levels that were discussed. I thought it was really interesting. Thank you for coming. We'll see you during our next webinar. Thank you and enjoy your evening. Bye-bye. And Max also thanks the interpreters. We're thanking you for listening. Thanks. Bye-bye. And thank you to Max for moderating, facilitating, and thank you.